Hey legends, and welcome back to the Sim Racing channel, where we're kind of course correcting. If you follow this channel for any length of time, you may have noticed that while I generally attempt to be as fair as possible, with the exception of notable train wrecks like Project Cars 3 or toxic publishers like Codemasters, sometimes the sentiment falls through the cracks and I have to go back and clarify some things. Today, we're focusing on Assetto Corsa Competizione, going back over its 2-year history and taking stock of how much it's changed over that period of time. We'll keep this introduction super brief and instead get straight into the nuts and bolts. Before we do, make sure to hit that sub to stay up to date with future sim racing news and reviews, including of course future ACC content, such as the upcoming GT4 pack, which we can directly compare to the newly released Automobilista 2. Lastly, my apologies for the poor voice quality you're about to hear. For some reason, Shadowplay decided to go full potato mode and I only found out after it was all recorded. I spent a while thinking about how to script this video, how to make it coherent, how to sort of describe my short yet, I suppose, poignant history with Assetto Corsa Competizione. Quickly became apparent that the best way to do this would be in a conversational setting, do a couple of laps together and just kind of talk through the game as we drive through one of my favorite track and car combinations in it, namely Zandvoort in David Perel's Rinaldi Racing Ferrari 488 GT3, because of course it is. David is he is the gem of sim / real GT car racing, and he must be loved and adored. I'm not saying that facetiously, by the way. He's awesome. He's like his onboard videos have helped me so much in terms of understanding what is and isn't possible with these cars, what to expect from this kind of racing, especially as someone that came into GT3 racing quite recently. And we're going to talk about that in more detail as I go back to, I think it's about 2.5 years ago that Assetto Corsa first came into Early Access 1. Now, I was one of the early backers of the game. I played it from the very outset of what they showed. So, I want to make sure that you guys understand, if you've watched some of our prior videos, it may seem like I have a chip on my shoulder about ACC. I don't. You know, I bought into it with the promise of getting one of the best GT races in the industry, and I applaud Kunos for developing this game. But what we got way back then is very different to what you're seeing me play through right now. So what first came out was one track and one car, which is fine. It's, you know, it's developmental. That's totally cool. It was just a gameplay teaser for us, I guess. It was the Lamborghini Huracan and the Nürburgring GP, both of which were new to me at the time. Again, because I was just getting into GT racing. And the Nürburgring GP was new to me because I'd spent all my time just driving the Nordschleife, because of course I did. I mean, do you even know what channel you're on? So, after picking up these two, I became quite fond of the car and the track, but I quickly noticed a couple of things. One, ACC on release had the single worst force feedback feel out of any racing game I've ever played in my life. And that's not hyperbole, it was horrific. I had a Thrustmaster T500 RS, and the force feedback was like this massive damping force with detail buried maybe, you know, 10,000 leagues underneath it somewhere. You could maybe feel something if you were scrubbing the heck out of the front tires. But that was it. You got no telegraphing of car behavior. You certainly couldn't drive a corner like that. I would have spun out right then, and I'm going to explain why, for a number of reasons. So you could not feel the car telegraphing its on the edge behavior whatsoever. You couldn't drive the car on the edge. It was like playing Russian roulette. Because the 5-point tire model hadn't gone in yet, going over any curbs was like playing Russian roulette. I mean, you had a 50-50 chance of just being launched out willy-nilly, and the moment that the car stepped out, the moment you lost it, the moment it went past the edge, you couldn't do anything about it. You had no way to regain that traction. It was just, once it was gone, it was gone. It felt like driving a boiler tank on wheels, and not even rubber wheels at that. It was one of the most awful handling sims I've ever played in my game, and that's in my life. And that's not hyperbole. It's reflects the actual experience that I had. And as somebody that was really getting into R-Factor back then, that was a bitter pill to swallow, because R-Factor, I mean, in terms of driving feel, it's got a heck of a lot going on that's very engaging and fun to play. Now, moving forward from there, that isn't really what I want to harp on about on this video forever. What I want to talk about is how the game has developed since then, and in what ways. So, I started playing this game again, and I stopped playing just after the 488 and the Hungaro Ring were released, but I started playing this game again shortly after the 5-point tire model was introduced, and also roundabout to coincide with this channel's launch, or rather with me taking this channel more seriously, because I know that a lot of you guys are into ACC, and for very good reasons. So one of the first things I noticed was when I ordered my Fnatic DD1 to coincide with, you know, the relaunch of the channel and this whole lockdown business, because I knew I wouldn't have much to do for a couple of months. The first thing I noticed was that ACC came alive with a direct drive wheelbase. Now that's not something I expected, because R-Factor actually kind of didn't feel very different. I mean, R-Factor felt kind of amazingly detailed even on the lowest end wheelbases that I've used it on. So as a result, the direct drive stuff almost felt too jarring. And that's something I still experience to this day. I'm trying to like reduce detail in R-Factor. I'm trying to like get the smoothing right. Whereas in ACC, it brought all that detail out, and that may be to do with, you know, the things that Aris has said. They're trying to emulate what power steering wheels actually feel like, without the canned effects, without any of the extra stuff that will give you detail about, you know, what your butt would be doing. So as a result, getting a more nuanced base with less, you know, inherent damping force lets those details come out a lot more naturally. And what I'm experiencing right now as I drive the 488 around Zandvoort is, it's not even the same game. Like, you can't call it the same ACC that I played in that initial early access release way back when. And that's one place where I'll really give a ton of props to Kunos, is that they're committed to making this the best game it can possibly be, and I have so much respect for that. I may not necessarily agree with everything they do in regards to the driving model. I may not, you know, I may prefer a, let's say, physically modeled tire model rather than the empirically modeled one, for various reasons that we may or may not get into later. But you can't take away the fact that they're just going to work on this game until it's the best thing it can possibly be, and I have so much respect for that, which is why I've continued to buy into this game, and why I very recently bought the Intercontinental GT Challenge Pack, and why I'll probably buy the upcoming GT4 pack, you know, as well as being an excuse to make some more videos with you guys. So one of the things that the chassis flex and 5-point tire model updates did, they made you able to actually drive the car on the limit, which is something you kind of couldn't do, at least not without some kind of precognitive abilities before. And the one thing I wanted to talk about that kind of became an additional boon is that shortly after I ordered my DD1, I decided to order the Club Sport Formula V2 rim, which is sort of, I guess, I'm guessing Fnatic's Premier, whatever, F1 style rim. Now, I never thought I'd need something like that, because I was, you know, road cars, give me road cars or death. Why would I not want to go full lock, you know, 900 degrees steering? Why would I need something that's just 2 paddles and a bunch of buttons? Turns out this thing is really good. But the knock-on effect I noticed, and this really caught me by surprise, is that Kunos actually developed for the Fnatic SDK, which means that when I tried this thing out, it has 2 diagonal slit LED strips, and whenever I kick in the ABS on this car, it just flashes red at me, just like fills my vision with red lights, which is absolutely amazing, especially when you drive this badly. So when I lose traction, it flashes blue. When I kick in the ABS, it flashes red. And because ACC's force feedback isn't necessarily, you know, let's say industry leading at telegraphing car behavior on the limit, that made all the difference in allowing me to do regular, consistent laps. At least when I'm not on camera talking with you guys. But that made all the difference for me in being able to enjoy this game again. So I don't know if you're going to take this as an advertisement for Fanatic gear or what. I don't really know what I'm intending it to be. I guess I'm just trying to tell you about my experience, and that if you are, I guess, a devotee to ACC, and I know there's a few of you among the subs and the viewers, consider perhaps, to get the most enjoyment out of this game, if your budget will allow, consider perhaps a more detailed wheel. If you can go direct drive like the AccuForce or the DDs, or even the SimiCube if you're rich, I mean, maybe consider it. I mean, if this game constitutes a lot of the fun in your life, then I think it's going to be taken to the next level with direct drive. I mean, it certainly was for me. It made the difference between being able to play it and not being able to play it. Certainly a far cry from where I was in Early Access 1 with that T500 RS. So that being said, that isn't the only thing I want to talk about. There are other factors of this game that I think make it a very, very compelling purchase, which kind of may be at odds with what you've heard from this channel in the past, but I want to take this opportunity to really give props where props are due. I think watching the bungled release of Project Cars 3 has made me so appreciative of where hardcore sim racing is right now, and I really want to make sure that Kunos get the props that they deserve. So I'm going to change tracks for that, because I'm getting a bit sick of lapping Zandvoort, and I think you guys are probably sick of watching it. Because this video isn't scripted, I'm partly deathly afraid that I'm going to miss some of the things I want to talk about, because there are so many positives to list about ACC that probably make it well, almost definitely make it the overall king of GT3 sims at the moment. So the very first thing we'll jump into is the setups. So one thing that they really get right is the role of tire pressures in all of this. They model tire failure, they model various, temperature of various points of the tire, flat spotting, all of the good stuff. Not in a physically modeled sense, but in an empirical sense. So, you know, that has its positives, it has its negatives, but one of the positives is that they've been able to, I guess with relative ease, code in tire damage. So if your tire pressures are too low, you got to really watch out about running over any rough curbs and things like that. There are a lot of elements about endurance racing modeled in this that aren't so much modeled in other games. The other stuff is the TC, because they have direct manufacturer data, they're able to get things like ABS and TC implemented in a way that's far more realistic. As you can see, the 488 has TC1 and TC2, which is like, at what point does the TC kick in? And then when it does kick in, how severe is that TC? That sort of stuff. And the most important thing you may not actually have noticed right there is the telemetry laps. So this game can actually output its own telemetry, so you can read it through Motec, an actual race engineer grade software, to look at the actual data of your lap, to be able to look at your performance empirically and be able to say that, okay, the dampers are, you know, within this kind of performance window, they need to be made softer, or the tires are doing this and that, and I'm getting too much slip around these corners, or my inputs aren't, you know, they're not as even as they should be. It's, you know, the amount of bravery to just put your data out like that is, I mean, I salute them, because I know that Studio 397 locked off their telemetry, I'm sure for very good reasons. The fact that Kunos are putting it all out there really says that they believe in what they're putting out, and, you know, 2 thumbs up from me. The rest is pretty much standard grade stuff, you know, fuel, the more fuel you have, the heavier the car is, the lower it sits, aerodynamic effects. Because their aero and their mechanical grip model is so much further than AC's was, and Aris spoke about this, the cars actually have performance sweet spots. So it isn't just like a matter of, you know, the car kind of, I'm noticing it squats too much under power, so I'm just going to make the rear slow bump a little bit stiffer, and then, you know, whatever, you know, I'll change the preload differential to change the on-off throttle behavior to give me the kind of, you know, effects that I want, the greater oversteer. You can actually very easily push the car out of a performance sweet spot, doing things that you would do in other sims to very linearly achieve the outcome that you want, which is, you know, a lot more realistic to real life. These cars have zones. You can't just set stuff up willy-nilly. Like a good example is, and, you know, I'm talking about my favorite sim here, so I hope you guys appreciate the impartiality, but in the GT3 cars currently in R Factor 2, you can actually drop the rear wing right back and then compensate for that by detaching the rear sway bar. So you still have stability at speed, but you've actually gained seconds per lap because, well, you no longer have that aerodynamic resistance, right? And that's a huge, huge flaw in their physics model. And that's something that ACC looks to get around, which I respect a lot. And it's something that R Factor is looking to get around in the future as well, which again, I also respect. So, moving out from here. The other one, as you can see, we're here at Laguna Seca, and that's a track that none of my favorite sims have, at least not in an official laser scan capacity. And that's one of the things I want to talk about with ACC.
Green light. Give it all you can.
The track quality is immensely consistent. You can actually kill the HUD because that's another one I want to talk about. You actually get a properly modeled heads-up display on the car. I don't know why I picked this track. It's very demanding of the driver. I don't know how I'm going to talk and race, but whatever. We'll take it easy. So, the tracks. Everything is laser scanned. Ooh, nice long shadows. I actually set it to a different time of day. It's kind of changing the track surface a little bit. Cool. Whatever. Looks cool. One of the best looking games, as you can see, no doubt. But being able to drive this with the Intercontinental Challenge, getting access to Bathurst, Kyalami, Suzuka. I mean, this game has some of the best tracks in motor racing, period. I mean, Brands Hatch, Silverstone, Nürburgring. Geez, what else? It's got Hungaroring, Zolder, Monza. I mean, the list keeps going and going. There's some amazing tracks, so you never get bored. And above all, the track quality is consistent. If you're coming off something like R Factor, it can be absolutely maddening, especially if you're a new racer to that game. You have absolutely no idea what's good and what isn't good. Like, you can load up into Lagos and it's old ISI content. It just looks like a potato made in 1998. And you're like, what is this? How can they be releasing this in 2020? Now, looking down this gorgeous track, Laguna Seca, thank you to my man Misha Mansour for introducing me to this with the Miata Challenge. I first drove it on the original AC. Unfortunately, none of my favorite sims actually had this track until ACC brought it in. And I don't know why I picked it for this talk through, because it's extremely demanding of the driver. So you're going to see some horrific laps as we go along here, talking about the finer aspects of ACC and the things that it does well. So one of them that you're getting right now is, I mean, industry standard sounds. Basically, this game and Dirt Rally have the best sounds in... Wow, nice one, Omen. Oh, okay then. They have the best sounds in sim racing. As you can tell, so many mechanical whines. The backfires. I love those straight cut gears. You just hear everything going on there. All little whirs and whines. And that's because Kunos are open to both manufacturer feedback and driver feedback. I mean, I know that they work very closely with David Perel. They've worked with him to refine this car in particular. So you shared with them onboard footage, spoken to them about the things that you hear as a driver versus the things that come through on the onboards. And I think that's amazing. That's one thing that makes me really respect what Kunos are doing. They're committed to improving this game and making it the best thing that it can possibly be. I love how I had to pick one of the glorious times of day to race one of the more challenging tracks on the calendar.
Well done, mate. The fastest lap so far.
Thanks, mate. It's a horrible lap, but I'll take that. So, otherwise, we've spoken about the feel elements, you know, we've spoken about the graphics. Obviously, the multiplayer speaks for itself. Assetto Corsa is the go-to online racing experience for GT3 cars. I think pretty much everybody knows that now. You can probably get away with, you know, GT Sport, but GT Sport is more of a simcade, quite clearly. So, you know, this kind of ties back to a video we did on this channel way back when I first relaunched it as a sim racing channel a couple of months ago, where I basically put it up against R Factor and said, look, this game does pretty much everything better than R Factor other than the physics and the feel, and I still feel that's the case. So I'm gonna use that as sort of the end cap of our conversation here. Because we've talked about all the ways in which ACC has improved over the last 2 years. We've talked about all the ways in which it's basically industry leading. And now I want to talk about the ways in which I believe it can improve. So, to me, in spite of all the changes that have been made, one of the pervading challenges in this game is driving the car on the limit. So one, you don't get the necessary feedback from the force feedback to let you know that the car is on the limit. I struggle to tell what's happening during braking as well, much of the time. And when you do slightly exceed that limit, the car still tends to... It has a tendency to go into these strange kind of lumbering slides which are not always easy to snap out of. Now that may or may not be realistic to GT3 cars, I don't know, but what I'm going off essentially is a bunch of onboard footage, including David Perel's of this very car, where he is going like... I mean, the dude is blasting. He's going like 150, 160 kph around high load corners, and he's seesawing the wheel. He's losing the rear end. It's starting to rotate, right? And that's a behavior you get a lot in R-Factor, and it's a behavior you can correct for. And when you see people driving in that game, they tend to be doing that sort of stuff. They tend to be doing those micro corrections, where as an ACC, the onus is on lining up the corner perfectly, perfect steering angle, exit, straighten out the wheel, only accelerate after the apex, which in principle is a great way to learn how to drive on a track. But in practice, you can't always get that, especially in a tough race, right? And that's one of the things... Well then. Well, that's one of the things I love about games like R-Factor and Automobilista 2. It actually feels like you're driving on rubber. You can feel the feedback from the car. You feel like you're dancing with the car at all times. There's this interactive element between the driver and the cars, which I don't have in ACC. Even though all of the improvements that have made the game so much more joyful to drive and so much more straightforward to drive, I know that my initial criticisms were on the right track because all the things that they have fixed have kind of pushed it in that direction of all the things I felt it was lacking. So whether that's a matter of them refining the tire model further or ditching it entirely and going for a physical modeling type thing, I don't know. I know that all of my favorite sims have a quasi physically modeled tire thing going on. You know, Beam and G, R-Factor, and Automobilista 2. All extremely interactive and communicative games when you have a car on the limit. The other one is that the car just feels kind of harsh. So if you go over like anti-cut or something, let's see if I can completely butcher one of these corners. Shouldn't be hard with my driving skills. Nope. can't do the anti-cut when I want to. Only when I'm trying to do hot laps. But when you go over the anti-cut sometimes, you go over some of the, I guess what you may call slightly rougher curbs, the car behavior is very juddery and odd. It's almost like there's no rubber flexing over. It's like, I don't know, it's almost like you've got concrete on concrete or something. So that's not too bad. Bit of a lumbery slide. That's okay, so you can catch those when you overpower the car. Too much torque to the rear wheels, you can catch those slides far easier now. But if I just, let's see if I can hit the anti-cut here and you can see what I'm talking about. See? It's just this weird kind of broken movement. I would compare it to like, if you think of, you can think of this as karate, right? As a metaphor, the broken movements of karate as opposed to Wing Chun, which would be R-Factor. Because in R-Factor, yeah, that curb would annihilate the car, but there'd be an element of pudginess, of responsiveness, of like, hey, something flexed then, something gave way. It isn't just one giant metal coffin on like plastic wheels that you're driving, right? And I still don't get the sensation from ACC that I'm driving on rubber. And that's the main thing I would love to see improved about this game, is just that feeling, that interactivity on the limit. I don't get that joy of driving from this game, that's probably a good place to call it. But I don't quite get that same joy of driving from this game as I do from a game like R-Factor or even Automobilista. And Lord knows Automobilista has a long way to go. There are a lot of things to be fixed about that game, but in terms of the core driving experience, that's one thing we all resonated with, was how right they got it. And I feel like ACC are coming from completely the other direction. They have amazing graphics, amazing detail, they have all the manufacturer data, they have the presentation, they have the multiplayer, the integration, the menus, but they're still trying to get the physics right. And I applaud them for doing that, but it's funny to see games working from completely different sides towards a middle point. And the more I drive these games, the more I feel like reality is somewhere right in between R-Factor and where ACC are right now for GT3 cars. In the meantime, I just want to put my hands together for Kunos. What you guys have done over the last 2 years has been absolutely remarkable. Even though I don't inherently gel with the physics models that you guys intrinsically go for, it may not be my personal favorite sim, I have a great deal of respect for what you've done, and rightfully you have a huge follower base for these games, as you should, and you'll have obviously far more players now that this game has come out on consoles finally. So, without waffling on too long, because Lord knows it's probably been like half an hour already, be sure to hit the sub to stay up to date with all future sim racing news and reviews, and of course future ACC content such as the upcoming GT4 pack and the GT3 comparison we're going to do with the Ferrari 488s, between that and R-Factor that is. Big thank you to Slightly Mad Studios for the recent joke content and also making me appreciate what an amazing state hardcore sim racing is currently in, all the great games we all have access from, and we've never really been in a better place. Big props to Kunos, big props to Studio 397, Reza, everybody else playing the game, less so to Codemasters and Slightly Mad, but I'm sure I'll keep you guys up to date with all the latest happenings and all of those spheres as well. So until next time, we'll see you guys later.